Thank you very much. It's great to be here. We're here because we care, right? And I should have a PowerPoint going on the screen as well. We're here because we care, and we're here because our own lives have been transformed, and because we long for others to find hope and wholeness in relationship with God. And I am also here because I care so much that I had the immense privilege of spending time hearing, analysing and interpreting the stories of a diverse group of people who had moved from unchurched backgrounds to being people of Christian faith. And today I get to share some of my findings with you. We know that our world has changed. We've heard the stats. We've seen evidence of it in our own churches and in our own communities. Less people are attending church, less people are affiliated with Christianity. And that's obviously a concern for people like us. But it's also an invitation to think about how we can do evangelism in an era where increasing numbers of people simply don't know, let alone understand the backstory of our faith. When increasing numbers of people have not been raised on Bible stories, and when we can no longer assume any base level understanding of the Christian story. Stuart talked about this last night. We've got successive generations growing up with no knowledge of the Christian story. And yet we know that some of those people from unchurched backgrounds do still become Christians. So I set out to answer the question, why are unchurched people becoming Christians today? It's a big question. It's a question that can be considered from various perspectives. Social scientists outline sociological and psychological processes by which people find faith. Theologians and Bible scholars reveal how God could be at work. But it seemed to me that the best way to find out why people are becoming Christians today is to ask some people who have just become Christians. Thank you. I'm glad it's behind me. Awesome. I'm really happy because I need it really very much now. Cool. Okay. So I won't tell you about the details of the research process that I went through, except to say that it was hugely rigorous, time-consuming, great fun, and earned me a PhD in the process. Woo. But very briefly, I interviewed people who had not been brought up in church. They had been unchurched before beginning the journey that led them to Christian faith. I interviewed people who were in Australia, and they were all Anglo-Australians. Choosing people who had not been churched before they began their journey prioritised understanding our contemporary, secularised and secularising context. Secondly, I only interviewed people who had become Christians in the previous 2 years, because stuff happens after people find faith and their understandings grow and their theological insights develop, and they tell a different story 2 years on than they would have done immediately after their conversions. And so I heard these stories, and I set the stories that I was hearing and the coding and the analysing that I was doing alongside the Bible, alongside theology, alongside social science, alongside all sorts of things that you guys don't need to read because I have for you. And now I want to tell you a couple of stories from my research, and then I want to go and talk a little bit about the findings more generally. Let me tell you about Hamish. Hamish described himself, before he became a Christian, as a militant evangelical atheist. He loved to fight with Christians, to have those really gritty conversations that he would win because he could tie them in knots with his clever thinking and his clever words. One day, Hamish was wandering through his lounge, through his hallway, and he caught this flash of gold leaf in his bookcase. And he thought, I wonder what that is in my bookcase. And he pulls it out, and it's a Bible. King James version of the Bible. He starts to read it and he goes, this really doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll have a little look and see online if there's any other versions of the Bible that do make sense, because I want to be able to read it and then argue with Christians using it. And so he found a version of the Bible that made some more sense to him and starts reading it. This is really powerful stuff, he thinks to himself. And that began a 6-month journey that he describes as a time when he prayed to a God he didn't believe in, not to be true. That was his prayer. Dear God, please may you not be true. I don't believe in you. And as he prayed this prayer, and as he read the Bible, and as he began to discover in the Bible a story that was big and real and deep, he also went online and spent lots of time trawling around, finding Christians who weren't afraid to engage with big questions. Finding Christians who are willing to say, we don't have all the answers. We've got big questions too. It's not actually all clear-cut all the time. It doesn't always make sense. But let's wrestle with this together. Let's explore this together. And so he was having this wrestle going on in his head, and he worked from home, and he'd arrive after dropping off his kids at school, and he'd turn on YouTube and he'd watch all the atheist greats. And he'd listen to them with these compelling arguments, and they'd be just completely destroying the Christians that they were debating with. And he'd be going, yes, yes, yes. And in his gut, he'd be going, no, no, no. Because in his gut, he knew that the love that he had for his family was something more than a biological urge. And so he knew that there was something more. One night, Hamish walks outside to let his dog out in the middle of the night to go to the loo. He stops, he looks up at the stars, he hears a voice say, "The heavens declare the glory of God." And he goes, "Oh, I guess I'm a Christian now," and walks back inside. Hamish. Let me tell you about Olivia. Olivia's mother was so anti-Christianity that she was excluded from religious education and excluded from anything that the chaplaincy team run at her school. Her only awareness of the Christian faith came through her involvement in a secular choir that would sometimes sing sacred songs. She would sing these songs and she would feel something in her that was calling her to response. She had a sense that there must be something special about the people who wrote those songs. There must be something special about the songs themselves and about this God that they spoke of. When Olivia went to university, she met some Christian people who were friendly. And even though the other non-Christians were kind of pretty mean to them, they were still really friendly to anyone. And there was always a place at their table or on their little patch of grass for anyone to come and sit and to be with them. Olivia told me about one of her Christian friends, Hannah. Hannah experienced a family tragedy that she talked with Olivia about after Olivia had offered her condolences. And Olivia says, that was kind of how I got to know her. We talked a lot about the tragedy and how Hannah saw God's role in her life and in the tragedy. And obviously it wasn't at that time like she was trying to evangelize or anything. She was just literally telling me what it was like for her and how she viewed her relationship with God. So I felt like it really made a big impact on me to just be able to talk to her and, I guess see where her head was at. And I was just mostly listening, really. So here's Olivia, the non-Christian, helping her Christian friend by listening. Hannah wasn't seeking to evangelize. She was simply sharing her story and her pain. And the openness that deep sharing created was a catalyst for Olivia's long process of being drawn into relationship with God. Sometime later, Olivia finds herself teaching in a church school. She was an itinerant music teacher, and so she'd go into different contexts to teach. One time, just before Easter, she was walking along the corridor, and there were all these posters, many posters lined up that the children had drawn that said, "He died for our sins." Picture of Jesus on the cross, "He died for our sins." Olivia's walking past all of these posters. She stops and looks at them. She goes, "That makes no sense to me whatsoever. I do not understand that. I do not understand what that means." But because Olivia wanted to be a better person, she wanted to be a better teacher, she wanted to do a really good job in the school that she was in, she thought, this is clearly important to this school, and so I need to learn some more about this. So she takes herself off onto the internet, as you do, and researches some churches that she could go to. Long story short, she ended up in a church of her friend Hannah, where she was formed as a disciple of Jesus, where she read the Bible, where she was resourced in her reading of the Bible by people of faith, where she had a space to ask questions, to be part of a loving community. She said, I've never been part of a loving community before I came and was part of this church. And the warmth and the welcome and the embrace that she received in that place drew her into a relationship with God. Okay, that's some stories. 3 agents active in the conversion process. The convert themselves were all active agents. They were working towards something. They were seeking, they were active, they were part of the process. God was involved in conversion in ways that I don't have time to describe today, and other Christians were involved in conversion. I devised this model that depicts the process by which people come to faith. The process begins with some initial exposure to Christianity, and for most of those I interviewed, that included some early contact with a Christian friend or family member. Many people attended something that was run by the church. Some had contact with a church school, either as a pupil or, like Olivia and also like Jean, whom I interviewed, a teacher or as a parent. Others became aware of Christianity through dreams about Jesus, singing in a secular choir, seeking deliverance, or watching a movie and stage show. Next, something acted as a trigger or catalyst. Some catalysts, like for Hamish, were linked to a particular incident, while others were ongoing. Some were positive, others were negative. Negative ones were things like relationship breakups, a serious accident, or some sort of malaise, be it spiritual, social, or mental. And a sense of dryness or dissatisfaction. Positive catalysts included a spiritual search or noticing something, like Hamish noticing his Bible or Olivia noticing those posters. And those catalysts got those I interviewed exploring faith for themselves. They engaged in spiritual practices, usually following an invitation to do so. As well as attending church, spiritual practices included praying, reading the Bible, attending a small group or Bible study, engaging in fellowship, just hanging out and eating together, because curry is important. And later, worshipping, using their gifts and being baptised. They were invited to participate in those practices by friends, colleagues, relations and others, and they were resourced to do so by those people as well. They made a series of micro decisions, saying yes to each stage of the process. Olivia could have gone, yeah, nah, and just carried on past the posters. Hamish could have left his Bible on the shelf. They continued to say yes to each stage of the process, keeping active, keeping engaged. And eventually, they called themselves a Christian. Most often, this involved naming their realisation that they had become Christians rather than a dramatic moment of decision. But this part of the model, only provides a partial picture. I also identified 6 affects, 6 things that the converts felt really deeply in their guts, that both resulted from and contributed to the conversion process itself. A yearning or a wanting more, a desire to live better or become the people that they really are. Welcome and warmth, a sense of belonging like a homecoming, a sense that faith relates to everyday life, a sense of resonance, a knowing, a simply making sense deep in the gut, and seeing things differently. And these 6 affects, indicative of the deep processes that were happening within those I interviewed, help us to understand the why of why unchurched people are becoming Christians today. Putting the model together, we see that the affects both contributed to and were consequences of the conversion process itself. No time for God, sorry. But wait, there's more. I kept analysing And I kept reading and I kept wondering what else the data would reveal. And eventually I reached what I call my substantive theory of why people in Australia are becoming Christians today. I realised it's all about authenticity. This one overarching theme captures the entirety of the conversion process, the affects participants' experience and the roles of each of the three agents. Religious conversion was fueled by a desire for what I call relational authenticity. Religious conversion was resourced by Christians who embraced and exhibited such relational authenticity in their personal, social, and spiritual lives, and God enabled relational authenticity to develop and flourish. Someone said yesterday, Jesus shows us what it means to be human. That looked better in my head. No. But before you become unnerved by the potential narcissism inherent in authenticity, note the prefix relational, and please hear that I define relational authenticity as the project of becoming the person you are, imaging the relational God. Christian theology points to our created status and purpose as imago Dei, as in the image of God. And the Bible tells of God's repeated invitation for human beings to return to who we are, people in right relationships with God and with the world. And this is what those I interviewed sought. This is what those I interviewed experienced with their Christian friends, and this is what they ultimately embraced by the grace of God. Thank you.